What happens when you take Spyro the Dragon, turn Sparks into a robot and give him a very large gun? You get Ratchet and Clank. Well, there are a few extra steps, but you get the idea. 4 PS2 games that spanned an entire console generation, each one figuring out what this series was supposed to be. But I never played them when I was young. So this last year I decided to go back and play the games that I missed. Pretty much as soon as I started, I fell in love. The camera fights you sometimes, the controls are stiff, but there's this very specific early 2000s warmth running underneath it all. Across 4 PS2 games, you can actually watch Ratchet and Clank figure out what it wants to be. In this video, I want to look back at that whole PS2 era with fresh eyes. Not as someone who grew up with it, but as someone asking what still works and what doesn't, and why do these games still feel so familiar? The original 2002 game feels like opening a time capsule. It's exactly what you expect from that era. Bright planets, cartoon villains, big weapons, but it feels like a rough draft for something bigger. The core loop is simple. Land on a planet, explore, jump, smack enemies, collect bolts, buy weapons, move on. It's a mix of platforming and shooting, but the two halves are still learning to live together. The worlds really stand out. Each planet has its own personality. Some are cozy hubs, others, like Altanis, push back hard, where you completely lose Clank's abilities and face tougher enemies. And it's genuinely frustrating. But it shows these worlds are pacing tools, not just themed obstacle courses. The worlds look great and have real personality. The weapons and gadgets already have that Ratchet and Clank charm, and there's a warmth to the tone that still lands. The camera is stubborn, movement and aiming and stiff, some sections drag, and sometimes the characterizations feel a little bit off to what you might now be used to. And you can really feel that these controls were designed for 2002. This is where the template is born. Planet hopping, juggling platforming and combat, building an arsenal of strange weapons, it all starts here. Playing it now feels reading the messy first draft of a book you know the ending to. Going Commando is where Ratchet and Clank stops feeling like an experiment and becomes a series. Coming from the first game, the difference is immediate. The biggest change is leveling. Health and weapons now upgrade as you use them. You're not just collecting bolts anymore, you're investing in a loadout. Every fight becomes a chance to push something towards its next level. The planets keep that strong sense of place, but the pacing improves. Combat sections don't drag, platforming is tighter, and side paths feel like rewards. The moment-to-moment loop is incredibly satisfying. Clearing a room, seeing a weapon level up, and then trying it on the next group, it holds up. The tone also settles into something more confident. Some side modes and minigames haven't aged well, and there are still difficulty spikes that hit harder than they should. Even before the systems, it just feels better. The camera is less of an enemy, strafing and aiming are more responsive, and platforming is clearer. The game's better at signaling what it wants. If the original is a messy first draft, Going Commando is where everything clicks. The leveling system, smoother movement, better pacing, this is the first time the series feels comfortable in its own skin. Coming into Up Your Arsenal after Going Commando feels like stepping into a bigger, louder version of that same game. Everything is familiar, but sharper. The tone is the first thing that jumps out. The jokes land more often, the characters feel more defined, and the story knows Ratchet and Clank are established in that third entry energy, where everyone knows what they're doing and decides to have fun with it. Gameplay-wise, it's Going Commando with the dial turned up. Encounters are more carefully staged, rooms push you to use your full toolkit, and set pieces are bigger and more frequent. It's the first time the series feels comfortable being a full-on action platformer. The weapons and progression have grown into themselves. Different weapons have different jobs, and encounters give you natural reasons to rotate through your arsenal. There's a nice rhythm to switching weapons, watching level ups land, and shaping a build that feels like yours. The flow is much tighter. You fall into that one more room, one more level headspace easily. The tone still feels good. It's not embarrassed to be a bright, loud PS2 game. Some mission types lean too hard on repetition, and certain gimmick sections show their age. If the original laid foundations and Going Commando built the structure, Up Your Arsenal is the victory lap. It locks in that tone, sharpens the gameplay, and delivers set pieces that stick. It is peak PS2 Ratchet. Deadlock/Gladiator is a strange follow-up. Instead of topping up your arsenal in every direction, it takes a sideways step, less platforming, more arenas, darker tone. It's Ratchet and Clank filtered through, what if this was a violent game show? The biggest shift is the focus on combat. Platforming is a supporting act now. You move between arenas, hit objectives, survive waves. It feels like someone took the parts of Ratchet and Clank that looked good in trailers and built a game around just that. The upside, the action can feel very tight. The downside, if you loved exploration and visiting new worlds, this feels like a step down. When it clicks, the arenas have a great rhythm. It's the most distilled version of Ratchet and Clank as an action game. The death game show framing is very mid-2000s, but it's charming how hard it commits. Arenas blur together, objectives repeat. Without different planets to explore, there's less sense of a journey. It feels like a really solid side mode stretched in to fill a whole game. Deadlocked asks, what happens if we strip away platforming and see what's left? The answer is a focused action game that proves how strong the combat foundation has become. As part of the PS2 arc, it's a stress test that quietly shows you what you'd miss if the game stayed like this forever. When you step back and look at the PS2 era as a whole, it stops feeling like 4 separate adventures and looks more like one long experiment. The original is the first sketch. Platforming and shooting don't always agree on how you should play. Going Commando is where it gets inked. Movement tightens, combat is deliberate, and leveling makes every encounter matter. Up Your Arsenal builds the big, confident version. Encounters are staged, set pieces are dramatic, and the balance feels intentional. Deadlock strips it to pure combat, proving how solid their foundation is and where its limits are. Together, the PS2 era is one long experiment. You can see a team figuring out what works, doubling down and pushing it to extremes. After playing through the whole PS2 era for the first time, here's where I've landed on these games now. The one I respect most on paper and enjoyed least in the moment. It's clunky, the camera argues, and some sections dare you to quit. But as a first attempt, it's fascinating. People who really want to see where it starts, or have a strong sense of nostalgia. If you're new, it's more like a historical document. This is where I went, okay, I get it now. The movement feels better, the leveling pulls you in, and it finally feels like a proper loop. A great starting point if you want a PS2 game that still plays well. This was the first one where I kept saying, just one more level. The one that deserves the peak PS2 Ratchet and Clank title. It takes everything Going Commando figured out and relaxes into it. If you only play one PS2 game today, this is it. Best mix of playability, personality, and early 2000s charm. Even as a latecomer, it felt instantly familiar. The Weird Cousin. It cuts away of exploration and variety, replacing it with focused arena action. As a full sequel, it's thin. As a spin-off, it's fascinating. People who love the combat and want it concentrated, or who are curious how far the PS2 era could push pure action. The PS2 Ratchet and Clank era is 4 games asking the same question in different ways. What is this series supposed to be? The original plants the seeds, Going Commando makes them grow, Up Your Arsenal shows you the full tree, and Deadlock shakes it to see what falls off. Coming into them late, what strikes me most isn't individual moments, it's the shape of the journey. Watching a series figure itself out over one console generation is strangely satisfying, whether you're here for nostalgia or discovering them fresh. And this is only half the story. The future trilogy is where the identity gets dragged onto newer hardware with more budget, more drama, and a lot more particles. But that is for next time. For now, that is the PS2 era of Ratchet and Clank, as seen by someone who arrived very late and found out these old games are still doing way more than they have any right to.